Good evening. My name's Joss Gifford-Burley. I'm the director of the Inc. Ecosystem Architecture here at Wacom. During this session, I'd like to discuss the new emerging technology called self-sovereign identity, which is going to fundamentally change the way that we all think about our personal data and our digital identities online. Joining me for this discussion are three very special guests from across the digital identity field. I'd like you guys introduce yourself. Andy?
Thanks, Joss. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'm Andy Parsons. I am the director of the Content Authenticity Initiative at Adobe. Adobe, of course, creates the Creative Cloud, Document Cloud products that millions and millions of users touch every day, and more importantly, that billions of pieces of media pass through every day. The Content Authenticity Initiative looks at how to provide verifiable cryptographic evidence of how things were created, and in some cases, who created them. So I also sit on the task force as co-chair of two task forces in the C2PA, which is a standards organization we helped start in the Linux Foundation. That's the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And there we focus quite a bit on ID and decentralized ideas we will speak about today. Trust and sort of the internet of trust is a critical underpinning and foundation to the work we do. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. JC?
Thank you, Joss. My name is Jan-Christoph Eversbach and stands for short JC. I'm the founder of IdentiNet, and we're a startup based in Bremen, Germany. Our mission is to help organizations automate and secure their processes that require data from third parties outside the organization. We do this by providing a digital interface, also known as an API, and a globally unique digital identity to every organization that allows them to send, receive, and verify data. Our product offer is based on self-sovereign identity technologies to achieve high interoperability and security in interactions. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, JC. And finally, Nacho.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for inviting me. My name is Nacho Lamia. I'm a lawyer with a PhD on the European regulation on electronic identification and trust services story. I've been working roughly during 24 years on the electronic ID means and digital signature space. During the last 2 years, I've been quite involved in the European Commission and the European Blockchain Partnership EVSI project, which is an infrastructure to develop a blockchain network for public service in the European Union, where we have been specially focused on SSI, self-sovereign identity solutions for public services and citizens. And I'm as well convening JTC, CLC JTC in 19, working with one, which is the place where we could propose a technical specification for this entire identity management for the European Union, aligned with the new proposed regulation by the European Commission. I'm working as well in ISO TC307, which is the DLT blockchain standardization committee, and in ETCTC ESI, which is the place where we standardize true services. So thanks for allowing me to join.
Great, thank you all. So talking about SSI then, as technology continues to advance, we find that more and more of our day-to-day lives are spent on purely digital and online systems. Especially if you think about the last 2 years, the coronavirus pandemic has helped sort of accelerate this. We find ourselves using the internet for our work, for our social interactions, and increasingly as well, our interactions with sort of government organizations and official bodies. For each of these services that we use, we have to log in using username and password. And whilst it's true that you can use like social logins, so if we think about our Facebook and our Twitter accounts, ultimately, you're still logging into that social login using a username and password. If you think about it, what this means is that you don't actually own your own personal, digital identity. It's merely being rented to you by the services and the systems that you're logging into. And by extension, what that means is that any of the data that you create on those services or any of the data that's associated with you on those services is also associated to that rented ID. And at any stage, completely outside of your control, those kind of systems could either revoke your access or simply remove that particular account. And what that means is that your digital identity ceases to exist. So the system that we have at the moment, as it stands, obviously is fundamentally broken. In the modern world, we actually deserve the right to not only maintain control over our personal data, but actually own our digital identities. And the technology that we're going to talk about today, this self-sovereign identity, this is all built around this concept of actually giving control back to you, the user, through technologies such as digital wallets and verifiable credentials. A simple way to think about a digital wallet is much like a wallet in the real world. You know, you have a national ID card, you carry that around in your wallet, and at any point, somebody can ask you, you know, prove your identity, prove who you are. You can remove that credential, present it to the person, and use that to actually validate your identity. Digital wallets operate in a similar way, except obviously in the digital space. The important key piece and the key difference between the systems we have now with usernames and passwords and SSI is that with SSI-based solutions, you control that data, you hold that data inside of your digital wallet, and by extension, you can then decide how and when that data is used. This gives you much, much more control over the entire thing, and also means that all that personal data, all those credentials are no longer sat on a third-party server somewhere as a big pot with everybody else's data, ready for somebody to kind of take and steal away for you know, nefarious purposes or trying to steal your ID. It's true to say that here at Wacom, we're currently building a person's, what I call a people-centric SSI system. The idea here being this is the backbone of all of our new technologies that we're building, our entire ecosystem. You'll hear about the creative rights. You've heard about our creative rights initiative today. And this sort of underpins all of these technologies. We believe that we should empower, you know, artists and our customers. And part of that empowerment is actually giving you control back of that data. So with SSI, the standards are getting quite mature, you know, but when it comes to day-to-day usage, we're not really at the stage where it's ready for mass consumption. So that being said, there are some early adopters in the field, and I'd like to turn to you, JC, and ask you, from your experience working with sort of companies, how do you see the SSI landscape at the moment from the sort of user perspective? What are the early adopters doing?
Yes, it's thank you, Joss. It's a very exciting time to be in the SSI field. Lots is happening. We see that the community around self-sovereign identity is growing rapidly. We have many individuals joining the conversation about digital identity. For instance, at the Internet Identity Workshop that happens twice a year, the participants have grown over the years fivefold to more than 300 people participating these days. We have a lot of organizations focusing on digital identity that have sprung up over the past years, like the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the Hyperledger Foundation, or the Trust Over IP Foundation. And as you mentioned, also the standards are maturing at the W3C and other standardization bodies today. We also see that the software, a lot of the software that we use in self-sovereign identity is open source, and the software stacks are also evolving rapidly. We also see that a lot of startups and established companies are turning to these new technologies. This is very exciting because they will develop products and services. And we also see that governments around the world are exploring the technology, like, for instance, the US, Canada, the EU, also Germany in particular.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for that, JC. So, Andy, with your with the CAI initiative, you talk about, you know, that's kind of geared around a similar concept of these kind of cryptographic entities, but not so much in sort of SSI. Have you come across much crossover in the SSI field with Adobe? And the CAI?
Yeah, quite a bit. Absolutely. So, I mean, you know, I can't think of a place where trust and identity is more potentially important than when you're dealing with people's creative works or news media, right? So it's probably not sufficient as we move into the future with things like the Content Authenticity Initiative and the C2PA Standards Group to say, you know, the BBC has published this, we can verifiably show you that it came from the BBC, but we're looking to move well beyond that, potentially know who the videographer was, who the team was that worked on something, and not to, you know, ignore anonymous or pseudonymous activities, right? We don't want to out Banksy accidentally through the use of verifiable credentials or DIDs. But the uses are myriad, and, you know, some of the stuff you're doing with CRI at Wacom absolutely mirrors what we would like to see the future of the C2PA standard take on, which again is, do we want a centralized identity authentication authority like Adobe in our case, not only verifying that a version of Photoshop was used that is certified to be a correct version of Photoshop, perhaps running in a secure execution environment, but also that, Nacho is who he says he is when he makes a work or creates an NFT. And, kind of at the end of that journey for our creative users, photographers, creators in Photoshop, creators of 3D assets, in order to monetize those things, we have to be sure that the person buying the thing has assurances that the person that will be compensated is the correct person. And in most cases, the creator or an agency of creators. And I think SSI and, as you said, sovereign control of which information is shared is an absolute critical underpinning of all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And talking about the government sort of organizations, Nacho, you mentioned that you're currently working with the EU and certain sort of governments. What's the current state, sort of state of play with the government organizations and states, and how are they sort of currently set for SSI-based workflows?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's true. I'm just one of the many experts working in that very big project, which is led by the European Commission and the member states forming the European Blockchain Partnership. This project is about developing and implementing and operating a blockchain for supporting public services. And one of the major use cases is precisely about what we call the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework, which is precisely a way to ensure that this technological approach and a human-centric approach for identity control, but not necessarily ownership of identity attributes, is really something that happens in the real world. For this, we need regulation. That means that if you want to use SSI approaches in regulated environments, if you want to have some legal effects for your identity attributes presentations and being able even to substitute the presentation of original paper documents, you need a kind of regulation. And to this end, the European Commission has presented at the 3rd of June of this same year a proposal for reviewing the eIDAS regulation. The eIDAS regulation is a very important regulation which harmonizes the electronic identification means and true services around the European Union. And due to this new approach, all European citizens should have the legal right to receive a European digital identity wallet provided by the member states with a high level of assurance identity credential that then will allow the European citizen to get different additional credentials from other sources. So the idea is that the eIDAS regulation is SSI by design, but it is oblivious as well by design, because you will have the right to share credentials without the issuers of that credentials knowing where you are connecting to. So therefore, this means that we have a regulation to ensure that this actually works in real world.
Yeah, excellent. And talking about that particular regulations of interest, one of the key points that we've discussed, the sort of four of us together before, is how we can actually bridge and get to this stage of digital utopia where users, the average users, can actually interact with SSI systems and use them. I suppose the next question really is, from the user's perspective, how do we actually bridge this gap? How do we what is the next things that we need to do? It sounds like we've got the frameworks beginning to be built by third parties and the governments, but how do we actually bring that so the average person doesn't have to understand what DIDs are, what VCs are, etc.? Andy, I assume that you tackled sort of similar problems when you were first looking at the user experience for the CAI system. What do you think the next steps are here? And what are the important key pieces?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure I have the perfect answer. We did sort of address questions on the periphery of user experience around identity, but again, kind of leaning back into the cushy pillow of Adobe as a centralized identity authority. So we did address, we think we've addressed, it's early days still with the CAI, which just launched in Photoshop a couple of weeks ago at Adobe Max. So we're beginning to see user feedback about that user interface. It has much more to do with understanding where you're revealing parts of your identity. But at the end of the day, there is a centralized trust authority. In this case, it's Adobe. The C2PA standard contemplates trust lists and older methods of pure public key infrastructure, where no matter how far you push trust up the chain, it's important for users to understand with those systems that somebody is issuing X509 certificates and somebody is effectively an arbitrator of trust in certain verticals and issuing those certificates as a certificate authority. So educating your, I would say average consumer, not because they're not capable of understanding, but they have altogether different intent when they're using Photoshop or Premiere, which is to create beautiful, amazing things using AI-powered tools. So I think we've begun to explore that. I can't say we've solved that problem, but the problem you're asking specifically about, Joss, I think we all have a long way to go. And you need to look no further than the MetaMask experience or any of the sort of DApp wallet experiences, which not only conceptually are very elusive to many people, often including myself, quite frankly, but the user experiences don't do very much to help people understand what they're doing. So if you have to sign a nonce in order to authenticate, the old OAuth login with Twitter is a much better, smoother user experience, not because you know what's happening behind the scenes, but because it's just a smoother user experience. You understand what's happening, why it's happening, one click, and you're logged in. So I think we have a long way to go. And I think there will always be a complexity trade-off between what's actually happening behind the scenes with VCs and DIDs and resolution and controllers, as Nacho touched on, to understand where your data is. The reward is you can decide what to share with someone. So, if you are entering a cannabis dispensary here in the United States, there's no reason to show your driver's license or government issued ID or reveal anything more than the fact that you are qualified to buy a certain quantity of cannabis at this moment. Nothing more is required. And we have a long way to go there, but I think user interface needs to lead the way. In fact, I'd like to see more parallel exploration of wallets, which may or may not subscribe to a full SSI system, so that when SSI is ready and rolled out across countries with interoperable cross-border identities, that user interface will be similarly ready for that. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we have a long way to go. And it's as important or more important than the underlying technology.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm inclined to agree. And I do wonder whether actually, when we talk about mass market, that will only hit once these kind of systems are added to digital wallets that exist. Once it's added to the iPhone system, once it's added to Android, that's going to be sort of one of our key turning points for the technology stack.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so talking about this kind of pushing the trust chain up, JC, in your experience working with companies kind of adopting these SSI type ecosystems, what would you say the key challenges and the next sort of steps that they face there are? Yeah, so a similar idea, but from the customer, yeah. Sorry.
It's actually one key point that Andy just made. Education is, I think, very important. Maybe from the company perspective, it's a little different because companies are exposed to identity systems. They know how identity systems work. They have prior knowledge, and unfortunately, this knowledge is based upon the systems that we had to this point today. And these are centralized systems, maybe federated systems, where we have a few parties that can exchange digital identities with one another. And when I work with companies that look into their supply chains and want to exchange data there, and there are systems today that do that, centralized supply chain management systems that force your suppliers to use that particular system and feed the data into your processes directly. And when I work with companies, these are the things that they have in mind. And it takes time and effort to educate companies on the new approaches that we have today that are A, way more secure, and B, that allow use cases that aren't really possible today. For instance, we talked about credential sharing, credentials that a company receives from another company or a state, a nation state. Maybe I receive a certificate from the United States and I share it within Germany or within the EU. This will become possible in the future. And but since this case isn't really there, we are so used to sending PDF documents, looking at them, trying to understand whether they're correct and valid or not. And this makes it more difficult to bring this technology to life because there is so many workarounds today that exist and that we have to work through. But there's one good example. There is email today, and email, I guess, is the one true system that comes very close to decentralized identity because I can send an email to you, to Andy, to Nacho, without having to go through a centralized system. I can send it to you directly and you receive it, and we don't use the same provider.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the early systems, like you say, email, I think DNS and things like that as well. Before we had these ideas of big piles of user data, the actual earlier systems are more geared to what we're trying to get to now with the distributed systems. It's an interesting topic. But another question with SSI, I mean, we've been talking primarily about digital identity and the idea of these issued credentials from state organizations and things. How do you think that SSI is going to impact like digital creatives and specifically the sort of creation community? Andy, have you got sorts of feedback on that or some ideas around that kind of thing? What impact do you think it will have with digital creators?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a lot of obviously firsthand contact with creators through our social media property called Behance for creators. And again, through Adobe products themselves, kind of seeing how people behave in our products. As competitive and Adobe products move to the web, we see more kind of lightweight usage so that people can use increasingly sophisticated tools to create things, AIs to create things, to create synthetic people, to create synthetic environments. And of course, these things can be used maliciously, but they can also be used to create amazing new experiences, whether it's VR, AR, et cetera. And getting credit or attribution for that work is important in the artistic community. If we're going to fund art, which has been, sort of a struggle for humanity for centuries, we need to figure out how to properly compensate creators. And there are lots of attempts that have been made over the years. Some of them Adobe ourselves are responsible for. But I think at the end of the day, decentralization, direct payments, and control over what parts of your identity you expose to what parties who may be compensating you is going to be the kind of magical unlock. I think you're beginning to see a little bit of that with NFTs, and we ourselves on the Content Authenticity Initiative have gotten involved in verifying Ethereum IDs, which is kind of a first attempt at making sure that the creator is the one who's compensated, and there could be a check done on NFT marketplaces where art is bought and sold. That coupled with smart contracts that ensure residual payments to the original creator. Those are the beginnings of the pieces of a truly open creator ecosystem without middlemen taking cuts along the way. And I think, again, identity is critical to that. And I don't think we have time to go fully into the pseudonymous and anonymous cases, but you certainly can be compensated without revealing your home address or your credit card number or your bank account number. And I think that's the unlock that we have been waiting for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. So going back to you, Nacho, you think, so what Andy was talking about there, we've got this whole decentralized, ideal that we're moving towards. How does that kind of impact from a legal perspective, do you feel? Not specifically in Europe, but I mean, it means like if I'm a decentralized identity, do you think this is going to cause a fundamental change in the way that we deal with each other from a day-to-day aspect, from a legal point of view? Or do you think it's kind of little steps that will be taken?
Oh, no. I would dare to say that this is a radical revolutionary way to change how do we relate with third parties by using our identity attributes. So in fact, somehow is that like we are recovering what we already had before the electronic identity world started. So as Andy explained before, so in the real world, we receive credentials from authoritative sources that might be public bodies or private companies or whatever. And then we are able to share this with third parties under our control. And we have the self-determination. This is a fundamental right in the European Union to decide who's able to use this data and for what purposes. So this is a kind of, it is curious because it is really enticing to me that the SSI world, the SSI proposition of value has appeared precisely in the United States, where they have a different approach to privacy, which is more in consumer privacy. So it is very interesting because precisely in the country of the world where they have developed the business model around surveillance of people's identity data, it is precisely there where this proposition of value has emerged. And it fits perfectly well with GDPR approach. So this is a way to be a kind of brotherhood between our region, these two regions in the world, as opposed to other regions such as China. So definitely it will end with the power of these feudal landlords that own your social identity graph. And definitely this will change the world as we know it, for sure, because it will come back, restore the power of the citizen to decide what are its personality, their rights, and who they want to share and show this personality with whom. So this is really, really interesting from that perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, thank you for your comments so far, guys. It's really, really interesting. We're coming towards sort of 5 minutes towards the end. I was wondering if anybody here has any questions at all. Yeah, just, yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. I was wondering if and how SSI has any impact on how we are going to pay for things, for products, for whenever we purchase.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Who wants that? JC, do you want to sort of start there with us?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I look at it from a technical perspective, and what is happening in the technical space is that we've seen cryptocurrencies evolve into something that we can use today. And SSI is the new thing on the block that has these credentials. It doesn't seem to be related, but what people need to see is that the underlying functionality is cryptographic keys. And they allow us to hold credentials and prove things, but they also allow us to hold cryptocurrencies, whether they are public cryptocurrencies as developed on Bitcoin network or Ethereum network, but also state cryptocurrencies that are being developed. And so there is an approach that is called the universal wallet, and that has the idea to unify these things into one thing that becomes usable to the end user, who will then hold their credentials, but also hold their purse in their wallet and pay with things. So from the technical perspective, I would say these things are unifying, gradually unifying and converging towards one thing, where our digital identities become these wallets and keys that we own and manage.
Yeah, and an interesting aspect that I was just thinking about there as well is that maybe as a bridging, we talk about this kind of process of trying to go from where we are now to where we're going with SSI. Visa can issue me with a VC, a verifiable credential, and then it kind of ties in as well. And in fact, I could probably create a limited credential from that. So actually, there is that kind of stepping stone in between the two phases as well. I think would be important. But for sure, yeah, when we go fully decentralized,
But if I may, I think that we should look at SSI as a way to perform strong pseudonymous authentication processes. That means that, yes, there is quite a connection between the crypto asset crypto asset world, and that means stable coins, it means securities, it means money in the future, and the SSI wallet. So this definitely will imply a movement from the fully identified strong authentication payment system we have today, at least in the European Union, to a new payment system that maintains a strong authentication, therefore the level of assurance, but it allows pseudonymity.
And I would just add to that, if I may, I agree 100% with Nacho. The currency of data is not going anywhere soon, right? So often we couple membership payment with rewards based on revealing parts of your identity. I think those, as a sort of transactional element, that will continue to be the case. The key difference that we've been talking about is the user themselves will control what data is shared. And given that a transaction can involve a payment and some bit of data, whether it's pseudonymous, anonymous, or bits of my identity, I may want to share my home address if certain rewards are offered, and I should be able to do that. And given that that can be part of a payment transaction, I do think that going forward, they will be very, very much linked together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for that discussion there. I think that's the key takeaway really for the SSI. It's all about empowerment, allowing you as users to make decisions. And, from our perspective in this sort of technical discussion, the important parts from our point of view is that we need to get that message out there, and communicating that to everybody is key, because as you can tell how excited we are when we talk about it, this will change the future, but explaining that and getting to that stage is going to be a difficult process that we need to be careful. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. Really. So thank you guys for attending. It's always a pleasure to talk to you all. No doubt we'll pick this thread up again. If you've got any questions, anybody here or anybody on the line, please feel free to email me or email us directly, and we'll respond and catch up with you. Furthermore, thanks very much, and catch you all next time. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Yep.